Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is a special live episode of Dispatches. The Israelis and their US sponsors have created a world where it's normal to fire on hospitals, where it's normal to intentionally drop bombs on schools and refugee camps and residential buildings, housing displaced children, where it's normal to kill journalists and UN workers and doctors and paramedics, where it's normal to deny premature babies access to the means of survival, and where it's normal to openly celebrate this genocidal barbarity as legitimate and civilized and moral. As Israeli society is consumed by hate, with one official after another openly declaring their genocidal intent against Palestinians, Israel's military is producing propaganda so bad, even Western media is finding it difficult to stomach. Yet still, not only does the corporate media cover up for Israel's crimes, it focuses instead on smearing pro-Palestine students and activists as anti-Semitic. But this isn't the Middle East of 2003. In 2023, there exists in this region something referred to as the resistance axis, which has a deterrent capacity of firing at the Israelis and Americans to defend their people from imperialist aggression. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Asad Abukhalil, a Lebanese-American professor of political science at California State University. Asad,
thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
It's so good to have you on. I think you're such an important voice to hear from right now as we're just witnessing so many unprecedented things taking place in the region. Of course, first and foremost, that being this horrific genocide in Gaza that's now into its 45th day. But moreover, I mean, there's another unprecedented aspect of this, and we're going to talk about everything I mentioned in the intro, as well as some of the latest going on with what's happening when we talk about Gaza, when we talk about what the Israelis are doing, how the Americans are talking about it. But I think one thing that is most important to raise right now is something that took place today that was also quite interesting and unprecedented. And that is the fact that Hezbollah attacked an Israeli military base near the border with 4 heavy caliber Burkan rockets, as they're referred to. And this was the headquarters that they attacked of the Israeli Army's 91st Division. And I think it's really important to show the images of it because the destruction it caused to this military headquarters of the Israeli Army's 91st Division is quite intense. It's not something that we're used to seeing when it comes to what Israel's adversaries are able to do. And so I guess, as we look at these images, there's a lot that comes to my mind, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this very recent development.
Well, good morning to you and the listener. Well, Rania, I think the footage we're watching can serve as a contrast of the kind of violence that Israel inflicts on Arabs and the kind of violence that Lebanese resistance is inflicting on Israel. Here is a scene of a military barracks, a pure military target that has been devastated. I haven't seen such scenes of scale of devastation in my lifetime from Lebanon. This is unprecedented. Contrast that, Rania, with the kind of violence Israel inflicted on Lebanon today. They hit a church, presumably Hamas-run church, I don't know, and they also hit the house of a physician. I woke up today and I saw this Lebanese said, my father is a physician, and they hit our house. It was shelled and it was partially destroyed. And I put the footage on my Twitter page. So it shows you, I mean, this is the eternal question raised. Who are the real terrorists? And to me, by practice and by origin, there is no question for anybody who studied history of violence in the Middle East that Israel not only pioneered terrorism from as early as the 1930s, when it started throwing grenades in public market, when it started using booby-trapped cars and animals, when it started using barrel bombs in the takeover of Jaffa in 1948, to letter bombs. All these methods of hijacking, all these methods of terrorism were pioneered by Israel and then perpetuated on a mass level by Israel. And yet, whenever the other side resists, first of all, its resistance is never called retaliation in the Western media. And even when they inflict harm on military target, it's considered terrorism. even with Israeli soldiers. Rania, you and I live in a country, or you grew up in a country. I came here to visit it, where I was astonished to see when Israel is engaged in atrocities against Arabs. I've read articles in the Washington Post and the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, by liberal columnists even, in which they talk about the anguish of the Israeli soldiers, the anguish. They try to evoke the sympathy of their readers to the soldiers who are doing the atrocities against the Palestinians. That's how skewed the standards are. And what is incredibly refreshing in recent times is that the phenomenon of social media have freed young Western minds from the captivity of mainstream Western media that are dictated by Zionist organizations and pressure. Now they are able to see for themselves. Look at the war on TikTok, the war on Twitter, and all social media. Even though these social media are suffering from censorship imposed on them by the US and Israeli government in order to serve the Israeli agenda. And even that, it's not enough, because we see percentages of when young people are surveyed about Palestine versus people who rely on mainstream media, you'll see a huge wide difference, because mainstream media do not show you what is actually happening. So individuals are volunteering, sharing the news that is so much more reliable than what I read every day painfully in the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. And I do want to get to some of the bad side of the media, which is, of course, what we're seeing from the corporate mainstream media, but it's certainly encouraging that so many young people, especially, are seeing right past that. And I think a lot of that is because you can't really fight with any sort of propaganda against the horrific images of what Israel's actually doing in Gaza right now. And we're going to get to that as well. But first, I want to raise something else here, because I mentioned in the opening that this is not the Middle East of 2003. Where the United States was able to, I'm not saying the US can't invade a country in the Middle East, it certainly is capable of doing it, but in 2003 it was able to do that to Iraq with very little resistance in the region against it. Whereas today, it's facing this prospect of all of these various forces across the region, whether we're talking about Hamas in Gaza, whether we're talking about the various groups that are operating in the West Bank that are resisting Israeli occupation forces in the West Bank, something that hasn't been getting as much attention, where the Israelis have killed almost 200 Palestinians. That was by the last count. That could have changed by now and already gone up.
In excess of 200.
Yes. Okay. So my apologies for that. It's really hard to keep up with Israel's murder count. But also you have Hezbollah in Lebanon that has been fighting this war. I mean, we have a war in Lebanon right now. It's just been contained for now to the south at this point, where all of these Israeli towns have been evacuated across the northern part of Israel, which is unprecedented, where there's been a tit for tat escalation for the past month and a half. But Israel's been mostly deterred by Hezbollah. And then you have this new element with the Houthis in Yemen that really, I think, surprised all of us with taking over this ship that was owned by somebody who happens to also be Israeli, which is a big deal because of what it means for global commerce. And then, of course, this is what I want to mention, you also have these groups in Iraq and Syria, which have been hitting at American targets in Iraq and Syria. And in a recent Washington Post article, I just want to read from it. It says, Biden's strategy to prevent a widening of the Gaza war is failing. Between January 2021 and March 2023, there were 80 attacks on U.S. troops. Since October 7th, only a few weeks, the number has skyrocketed to 61. The Pentagon is now frustrated, decrying a failed deterrent strategy. Quote, "There's no clear definition of what we are trying to deter," said one official. But of course, the solution is not to strike harder, right? We know that. The answer, of course, is all about forcing the Israelis to stop the slaughter in Gaza. But of course, the Americans are unwilling to do that. Rather, they're sending the Israelis more weapons and really encouraging the genocide there to continue. But I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts on the fact that we live in a very different region now, where both the Americans and their Israeli clients have to contend with the fact that they just can't run around the region doing whatever they want without consequence. And the consequences being that there exists military forces who have shown that they're willing to strike back.
You're absolutely right. And the difference from the time of my youth and today it's not that there weren't any resistance groups back then. There were plenty. In the time when I was a boy and I was a young man in Lebanon until I came here in 1983, in South Lebanon was filled with various resistance groups, Lebanese, Palestinians, and some Arabs as well. All of them were dedicated to the cause of defending Lebanon against Israel and liberating Palestine. But the thing is, sadly, they were not very good. They were getting a lot of resources and support from Soviet camp countries and from Arab countries, but they were not in any way utilized. And the head of all these groups were none other than Yasser Arafat, who were never serious about mounting a resistance movement, let alone a revolution. And he was also doing the bidding of Gulf countries from whom he was getting, millions of dollars. And as a result, when Israel would invade, it would be able to advance into Lebanese territory in few hours. There were people who were brave, there were people who were trained, but there was no leadership decision to mount a real resistance movement because so many things on the mind of Yasser Arafat were compromises, concessions, and diplomatic maneuvers by which he wanted to get the approval and the recognition by the United States. So that was really scuffled. And for that reason, in 1982, Israel went and reached Lebanon within a few hours. Those days are long gone. Israel is dealing with a different quality of Arab resistance group, so different. And they are tenfold in strength and effectiveness than before. I just tell the listeners this example, which I often use in Arabic, which is in the time of the PLO and the Lebanese national movement, they didn't even have people who were fluent in Hebrew. I remember the time, if there was a document in Hebrew and somebody in the PLO organization wanted to get a translation, they used to go to the Institute of Palestine Studies and get one of their few teachers of Hebrew in order to translate this document. Today, listeners would be surprised. Hezbollah has a special school for Hebrew. They train their commanders to know Hebrew. They intercept communication in Hebrew by Israeli military. And that's how they are able to be very effective. In the time of my youth, there would be so much shelling from South Lebanon to Israel, and rarely there would be an Israeli soldier killed. Today, whenever Hezbollah hits, they hit a target. They hit a target mostly. The Israelis, of course, do whatever they do, which they always do well, which is hitting civilians and hitting civilians' target. That's their specialty. And that's intentional. People do not understand. Israel intentionally killed children, has done so since before 1948, because their lesson is psychological warfare against the Arabs, to scare them off so that they will never contemplate resisting Israel. They want to be totally subjugated. And for a while, it worked after 1948. Menachem Begin, in his book, The Revolt, admits such about the massacre of Deir Yassin. He said the intention was to instill terror in the heart of the enemy. Today, the enemy is not deterred. The enemy is not scared or terrorized. It's the opposite. We saw that in 2006. The footage today hitting a military target is incredible. And it's being seen widely throughout the Arab world. And what is also interesting, Rania, is when Hezbollah was said to be acquiring precision-guided missile, there was a huge uproar in the United States and Israel. Because why are you getting precise missiles? So what's the answer? They want them to have erratic missiles that would be off target, like would not hit a military target. You should applaud their ability and their attempt to get precision-guided missiles, but that's not the case. So I think that Israel is dealing, and the United States is contending with a different kind of movement. This is like in the first speech by Hassan Nasrallah during this war. He reminded the Americans, because the Americans brought in their ships and aircraft carriers, and their drones are flying over Gaza, which makes the United States officially an accomplice in the war crimes and crimes against humanity occurring around the clock in Gaza. So Hassan Nasrallah told them.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead. I just want to say, Hassan Nasrallah told them that in 1982 to 84, the United States was heavily present in Lebanon, bombed the hell throughout Lebanon, in the southern suburbs and the mountain. And there were groups that were not known at the time that basically drove away the Americans from Lebanon. And he was saying the strength of these groups, whoever they are, is now tenfold. And some of these people are still alive, and their sons and their grandsons are active in resistance movement. So I think for that reason, the United States knows this. And the Israelis, on the other hand, are trying to drag the United States into a war because they obviously can't do it on their own. They are scared. They are scared of Lebanon, something I never dreamt of seeing. But the United States, I mean, you would think that nobody would think in the United States to get into a war. But with this guy, Biden and Blinken, anything is possible. I mean, they don't think straight. I never thought anybody would be as reckless as George W. Bush. And now we've seen, yes, Biden and Blinken are far more reckless.
And I want to touch on two of those points. The first one being what you mentioned about the Israelis excelling essentially at massacring civilians. That is what they do best. That's how they fight wars. It's a kind of shock and awe, I think. And right now with Gaza, they're really trying to shock and awe the region with targeting everything. They're trying to wipe Gaza off the map, and they have said as much. Now, you were in Beirut during Israel's invasion and siege and bombing campaign in 1982. And having survived that, I'm just curious, are you shocked by how far Israel has gone in Gaza this time? Because so much of what they've done does seem unprecedented, especially the systematic destruction of hospitals. Like, I can't, and I could be wrong, I'm not a historian, but is there a time in history that you know of where a military force has systematically destroyed hospitals and then spent all of their time creating propaganda to try to justify, very bad propaganda, I should say, trying to justify targeting hospitals as if it's like some sort of military target?
Well, I can say, Rania, in my lifetime, this is the most savage, indiscriminate campaign of terror of any state, any occupation state that I have seen. They have absolutely no limitation. Don't get me wrong. In 1982, the bombing was indiscriminate. Even a Zionist like Thomas Friedman admitted such from the New York Times dispatches that he wrote from Beirut at the time. But the level of what they're doing today, because the level of support they are getting from the United States is also unprecedented. I mean, imagine the spokesperson of the National Security Council of the White House said publicly and bluntly, there are no red lines on how much slaughter Israel can do in Gaza. He basically is given Israel the ability and license to commit as many war crimes as they wish, and they are doing their best to do that. And for that reason, I think Israel is taking the opportunity to send a message to all Arabs in the future in order to be scared of Israel, because they are not scared. Israel today is confused, and Israel is in a panic because they realize we are not scaring those Arabs anymore. Look what happened in Gaza, Rania. Not only they have inflicted that much slaughter on these civilian population, but the population is not scared of them. And we haven't heard any voice in which the people were speaking out against Hamas. All of them are speaking in unison against Israeli terror. I mean, of course, Israel did bring an Israeli actress who pretended that she is a Palestinian living in Gaza, but that was exposed like most of the Israeli propaganda that has been produced by the Israeli military. But the point is, Israel is in panic because Arabs are scaring them instead of the other way around. So for that reason, they feel if we increase the tempo of our terror, if we kill more people, if we increase the percentage of children that we kill, maybe the Arabs will be scared, will be deterred. But it's not happening. And for that reason, I predict they will continue to engage in slaughter to the very last minute when the United States tell them enough is enough. But it's not enough for Biden. More than 12,000 people, mostly civilians, are not enough for the war criminal team of Blinken and Biden and Bernie Sanders and the Green Party in Germany and the Socialist Party in France and the Labour Party of England. There is a collective Western complicity in what's happening. All of them are guilty. And I think, as I spoke to you before, I think the Arabs and people of developing countries are seeing for themselves. The entire rhetoric of the left and the progressive movement is a myth, just like the notion of an Israeli peace camp. Just today, I saw a statement by the leader of, by Lapid, the leader of one of the opposition groups in Israel, in which he basically said there are no innocent people in Gaza. I mean, this is the opposition. These are the people they want Arabs to make peace with. These are people who support terrorism against Arabs. I mean, I spoke to you about the percentage of a public opinion survey in which 3%, a whopping 3% of Israelis supported a ceasefire. Look at the United States. Look at the US Senate. Only one senator supports a ceasefire. Richard Durbin. He's not even a man of the left. Even the left, the so-called leftists in the Senate, like Warren or Sanders, are not supporting a ceasefire. Of course, they speak about all the children, and they speak about the children that are suffering without telling us who is doing this to these innocent people. They cannot dare say it's Israel doing it. They are as cowardly as United Nations and UN-affiliated organization, which talks about the horrors without naming the culprit, without naming the perpetrator, the criminal responsible for all this.
Yeah, and I just real quick want to apologize. My camera's lagging and I think I have a cord problem, but we're just going to have to go with it for now. But at least the audio is coming through clear. Asad, I wanted to ask you about the fact that you have this man called, I actually saw you point this out on Twitter, and then I went and looked up the quote. Brett McGurk, he is the Biden administration's envoy to the Middle East and North Africa. And he was in Bahrain on Saturday for some summit. And when he was there, he was asked about the war on Gaza. And he said, he explained when it came to the fact there was so much destruction and civilian casualties, he responded that the United States would keep its disagreements with Israel private, and quote, "We will not tell another country how to grieve or how to protect itself." And this was really shocking to me because, there are stages of grief, right? There's like depression, anger. At some point you get to acceptance. There's like a bunch of stages of grief. I didn't know one of those stages was genocide.
Exactly.
Like, are we supposed to take from what he said that Israel's genocide in Gaza is a legitimate response because they're grieving?
Exactly.
The kinds of things they're coming up with to justify this just get more warped and twisted.
Exactly.
And then I also, before I get your reaction to that, I also want to show you this clip real quick that you may have already seen. It's of the EU foreign minister, essentially, Joseph Borrell. And he's in an interview with Al Jazeera, and he was asked about the issue of war crimes. So I'll let everybody listen.
Please.
هل تعتبرون أن ما تقوم به
Oh, I'm sorry. It is in Arabic, so there's subtitles on it. So for those who are just listening, I'm sorry, but those who are watching can read the subs. Here we go.
إسرائيل هو جرائم حرب.
Well, I am not a lawyer.
أنا لست محاميا، ولكن هناك محكمة جنائية دولية ستتولى التحقيق والالتزام بهذا القانون.
هل موقف الاتحاد الأوروبي أن ما قامت به حماس في 7 أكتوبر جرائم حرب؟
Yes.
نعم، نحن نعتبر ذلك جرائم حرب لأنه قتل المدنيين بشكل واضح من دون أي سبب، قتلهم فقط لأنهم كانوا هنا.
And so, okay, for those who are just listening and couldn't see the subtitles, essentially he was asked, do you consider what Israel's doing in Gaza, which is killing civilians, to be like against international law? And he says, well, I'm not a lawyer. So we'll have to let the International Criminal Court handle that. And then right after that, he's asked, do you think what Hamas did on October 7th violated international law? And without hesitating, he said, yes, they attacked civilians for no reason. So just the double standards there are incredible. So I'll let you take it from there, Asad.
No, I mean, this is, by the way, is going viral throughout Arab social media, and I posted it today. It's incredible. It hasn't been made into English. I think it should be spread widely in the Western world by support of the Palestinians, because I think it's a very good clip, and it reflects their thinking. I mean, they are very categorical. I mean, look how they covered the Ukraine war. And I'm talking about Western media as well, and even human rights groups. They are very categorical and very quick in rendering a judgment about war crimes when it comes to enemies of the United States, be it Russia, being Iran, being Hezbollah or Hamas and so on. But when it comes to Israel, they always have these Clinton-esque lawyerly justification that they always change and switch and shift. Look at the lies in his statement. The first thing he said was, he's not a lawyer, as if you have to be a lawyer to decide about the quality or the classification of the slaughter of more than 5,000 innocent children. The second thing is he invokes the International Court of Justice. I think he meant International Criminal Court. But the point is, he knows that we know that those courts and those UN-affiliated organizations do not operate without permission from the United States. Only once the International Criminal Court thought considered of investigating US war crimes in Afghanistan because they were killing something in excess of 300 civilians a year in Afghanistan. In some years, they killed more civilians than the Taliban, who were supposed to be the premier terrorists in Afghanistan. And when that occurred, whenever the US government heard of that, the US government immediately slapped sanctions on the officials of the ICC, and they threatened action. They threatened to kidnap them. I mean, the people in the ICC were horrified, and they immediately withdrew their action, and they rescinded their decision, and nothing happened about US war crimes in Afghanistan or in Syria or in Iraq or anywhere else. So we know the rules, but it's now, I think the West has never been more honest about how biased, how criminally responsible it is in what Israel is doing in the Middle East and what it is doing in the Middle East. I mean, why are there US troops in Syria? Why are there US troops in Iraq, for example? And also, Rania, I like how US media always say, United States maintain a force of 900, look how innocent it sounds, 900 soldiers in Syria. What they don't tell you, there are thousands of military contractors, thousands of them in Iraq, thousands of them in Syria, and so on. And of course, there is now a military presence inside Israel, because you see, Israel this time was so scared, they went and sought rescue, just like Gulf countries. They can't defend themselves. We send them $3.8 billion a year. We give them the most advanced military technology, and yet, just like Gulf countries, whenever they are hit now, they go screaming and crying to the United States to come and rescue them. And the United States came and trying to rescue them. And they are jointly responsible for the atrocities in Gaza.
You know, you mentioned that there was this poll done that about 3% of Israelis support a ceasefire. And that was, of course, just one poll, but I think it shows you where the Israeli public is at. And I think there's something that we've seen, because we're seeing it on social media, we're seeing it in Israeli media, and we're seeing it sometimes in Arabic media, but the US, the English-speaking corporate media, is ignoring it. And that is that the fact that that Israeli society is consumed by genocidal hate that is so utterly shocking. Like Assad, in my life, I mean, I have a lot of family that have very negative views of Israel, obviously, because their country was invaded by Israel, was bombed by Israel. They've seen what Israel's done to the region. I grew up going to protest for Palestine and for Lebanon when Israel was bombing Lebanon. I've never, ever heard family members of mine, and I have a big family, I have a whole village. I've never heard anybody say, let's rape them, let's kill their babies, or celebrate like children and being slaughtered. I've never heard that before. You know, and somebody just yesterday who I was talking to said to me, you know, Rania, we celebrate shooting their tanks. They celebrate killing our children. Like, they are killing our children in front of their parents. They're killing children in front of their parents. And they're showing the world that now you can kill anyone on camera. You can desecrate their bodies, and the world can't do anything about it. That's the message Israel's sending, right? But on top of that, they are showing that they like doing this to us. And I just want to show some examples before I get your reaction. Here's just a video that Breakthrough News actually just put out. Sorry, let me add it to the screen. It's a video, just a little composition of some recent episodes of Israelis celebrating hate. Here we go.
יא בת זונה, עזה יא שחורה, יא פח זבל. עזה, יא שרמוטה. עזה יא בת 1000 זונה. כושלאים עם אמא שלך, עזה. עזה יא בת זונה! I'm on the beach in Gaza, in Gush Katif. I'm safe, I'm happy. Me and my friends conquered Bet Laia and El Tatra and Sulatin, and we're moving on, and we're going to conquer the rest of Gaza.
208 בפיקודו של ישראל בן פזי לא יעצור, ימשיך עד שנשלים את המשימה שקיבלנו. כובשים, מגרשים ומתיישבים. כובשים ומגרשים ומתיישבים. שמעת ביבי? כובשים ומגרשים ומתיישבים.
So that's just a few examples. And this is just average people in Israeli society as well as soldiers. But this is also, they're just taking the lead of their leaders, who we've seen one after another go on various cable news stations in their own media, in English media, and say, there are no non-combatants in Gaza. They're all terrorists. We want to wipe out Gaza. We want another Nakba in Gaza. We've seen this said by high-level, senior Israeli officials expressing genocidal intent. But I also think it's important to see that societally they are celebrating this. And before I get your take on that, I think it's really important to watch one more really disturbing video that you probably have seen, Assad.
Electronic Intifada.
Yes, the Electronic Intifada. They've been doing excellent work. If you're not following the Electronic Intifada, you absolutely must be. And the Israeli state broadcast, or the Israeli national broadcaster, Khan, uploaded this song to X, what used to be Twitter, of Israeli children singing in celebration and support for the Israeli army's mass extermination campaign of Palestinians in Gaza. And I am not exaggerating when I say that. Of course, this is translated by the Electronic Intifada, so I'm going to play it again. Sorry to listeners who aren't going to understand the Hebrew, but this is really, really worth playing. Here we go.
מטוסים מפגיזים ארץ ארץ, הנה צה"ל חוצה את הקו, לחסל את נושא זה בכיס. עוד שנה לא יהיה שם דבר, ונחזור בבטחה לביתנו. תוך שנה נחסל את כולם ונחזור אז לחוש את שפתנו ונזכור את כולם, את יפי הדרומית והגן, עיר שכזאת לעולם לא תהיה לביבנו לשכוח. אהבה מקודשת ודם, את תשובי אלינו לפעול. וכאן נגמרו המילים, ונותרה נשמתנו זועקת, כי נפשנו לא אחוריה. כי נפשנו היום גם לוחמת. עם אחד, עם הנצח לעד, לא נחדול ונשמור על ביתנו. לא נשפוט ונראה לעולם איך היום משמידים את אויבינו. ונזכור את כולם, את יפי הדרומית והגן, כאילו שכזאת לעולם לא יקרה ליבנו לשכוח. אהבה מקודשת ודם, את תשובי אלינו לפעול.
So, Assad, please, your thoughts on everything I just showed you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it makes me angry, but it's also an illustration of the repugnant culture of death that Zionism has created. This is a society that is absolutely sick, suffering from a deep case of hatred of the other. And while we have US Congress and its congressional committees scrutinizing the school curricula and popular culture of the Arab world to purify it from any references of anti-Jewishness, which is a good thing. I don't want any anti-Jewish references at all in Arab culture. And the ones that were guilty of it are US friends in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia in particular. Nobody has produced an avalanche of anti-Semitism in the contemporary history of the Middle East like Saudi Arabia. But of course, now it's the closest friend of Israel. And but they never scrutinize the school curricula in Israel. They never look at their popular culture. But they see Zionism needed to be fundamentally racist. How do you justify taking over somebody's homes, taking over their land, their water, their space, their air, their memory? How do you do that? You do it by denigrating them. It's very much like slavery. It's very much like Nazi Germany. It's very much like apartheid South Africa. This is the culture of Israel. And it is this reason, Rania, why Arabs, the people, not the despot of the United States that are propped up by US arms, but the people of the Arab world do not want to make peace with Israel. Make peace with them over what? As Ghassan Kanafani famously said. Oh, on what terms? While you are putting your shoes on my neck? I mean, for that reason, the notion that there is a solution to this called a two-state solution that the Biden administration is trying to sell to the Arab world, nobody's fooled. Since 1970, there has been a peace process which was merely a cover for Israel to be able to perpetrate unmolested series of war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide against Arabs throughout the Arab world. I always repeat in my lifetime, Israel has bombed Tunisia, Sudan, Somalia, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine, obviously, and downed civilian airliner for Libya and hijacked a Syrian. The first hijack in the Middle East is not by Palestinian groups, by Israel in 1954. In 1950, it shot at a Lebanese civilian airliner. That's the record of Israel. And this is why we don't want a peace with an apartheid state. What Arabs are proposing instead is nothing of the sort what they are saying, genocide or throwing the Jews into the sea. That was never the intention. I mean, there were some kooks who spoke that language. They were mostly allies of the United States, incidentally. But, they tried to attribute such statement to Nasser, and he never spoke in those genocidal terms, ever. They tried to attribute it to Ahmad Shuqayri, the first head of the PLO, and he never spoke like that. I mean, and you're right what you said. We don't speak like that in the Arab world. We don't say that about Jewish people. We don't have a celebration or singing in which we are, expressing joy at the sights of horrors that is happening in Gaza. I mean, we don't do that. And most importantly, you have to wonder to yourself, not a single Israeli soldier has been a conscientious objector. We haven't seen of one case of somebody said, I was willing to accept 2,000 children or 3,000 children, but over 5,000 was really stoking at my conscience. I couldn't live with it. We haven't seen one. Don't get me wrong, Rania. In a few years, we're going to have a documentary about an Israeli soldier who experienced nightmares because of how many children he killed in Gaza. And people would applaud that Israeli soldier. He's going to be invited to Davos, and that documentary is going to win an Academy Award. But the Arabs is a different place. I think this has been a wake-up call for the Arab people about what has been cooking between the United States and Gulf governments in terms of so-called attempt to bury the Palestinian revolution. This is also a wake-up call for Palestinians in particular. They have to do away with the corrupt collaborationist Palestinian Authority, which the United States and Israel want to transport into Gaza. And the people of Gaza will not accept that whatsoever. I think what is needed to scrap and discard the Oslo process, to bring down, demolish the Palestinian Authority and treat it like the people of South Lebanon treated the South Lebanon army, where they fled across the border where they belonged into Israel, where the head of that South Lebanon army wound up in Israel running a hummus restaurant somewhere in Palestine. That's what they belong. Let Mahmoud Abbas go and open a restaurant somewhere inside occupied Palestine. He does not belong to speak in the name of the Palestinian people. And you have people with Blinken and Biden, enemies, lifetime enemies of the Palestinian revolution, daring to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people, telling them who represents them and who does not represent them. That didn't work in the PLO case, and it's not going to work now. I am here to tell you, Many people in the Arab world had so many reservations about Hamas. Many people criticized Hamas for the bombing of the second Intifada because they thought it was utterly indiscriminate and so on. And there were many criticisms, and Hamas took them into consideration. But now I hear no criticism of Hamas whatsoever, except in Saudi regime media, because they are collaborating with Israel about the coverage. But in the Arab world, it's not like that. The military spokesperson of Hamas is now a cult figure throughout the Arab world. His image is everywhere, on social media as well, on the streets of Lebanon and Algeria and other places. Hamas is witnessing a resurgence. This is the unintended consequences. They wanted to bring down Hamas. Hamas now speaks for the majority of Palestinians, and I dare say majority of Arabs, because they are perceived as standing up to the Israeli atrocities against innocent people. Somebody has to account for those crimes. And people who are engaged in resistance against Israel are seen as the ones who are credible, not the Arab regimes. Look at the Arab League summit in Riyadh. The intention of the summit was entirely to deflect and to basically suppress Arab public opinion, which has been very angry. And last week, the Saudi foreign minister said, we are going to hold a meeting for the committee that was tasked by the summit to deal with the issue of the ceasefire in Gaza. The other day he said, it's going to meet next Monday. I mean, why the rush, right? Why the rush?
Take your time, guys. Take your time.
Yeah. No. And today I'm here to report there's an Arab League delegation going to China, as if China is the sponsor of Israeli crimes in Gaza, because they don't dare go to the United States. Because if they go to the United States, to Washington, D.C., they will be asked, are you asking the United States to end its endorsement of Israeli atrocities? And they wouldn't dare give a straight answer that would embarrass their Israeli allies.
It's incredible, isn't it, that you have these states? I mean, Jordan, I'm sure you saw, sent tanks to its border with the West Bank to prevent prevents Palestinians and Jordanians from trying to infiltrate into the West Bank, basically protecting Israel from potential attacks from Jordan. Like, it's incredible. They sit there and say, oh, we're against the killing of children. They're using the term genocide, but it doesn't matter if they're not going to use any leverage. And you're absolutely right. I mean, to be going to China is such a sideshow. Like, China can't really do anything. The only force we all know, the only force that can stop this genocide is the Americans. And it's absolutely shameful. The Egyptians, the Saudis, the Jordanians, absolutely shameful, because their threshold for dead Palestinian children is clearly far higher than 6,000, because that's what we're approaching. That's what we're approaching.
I can tell you this. What's happening in Gaza is going to have such an impact on Arab politics for years and decades to come. It is something like Palestinian historian Prof. Khalid told me the other day. It is comparable to the Nakba. How it's going to shake the foundation of the Arab political order. But let's face it, there are only two leaders that the United States listen to right now, the UAE and the Saudi one. And those two are in cahoots with Israel and what's happening. They absolutely do not want it to stop. And the Saudi media have been extremely vocal in their admonishment of Hamas, demonization of Hamas and Hezbollah, because they are on the side of Israel. They want Israel to win, just like back in 2006, they wanted Israel to win. But I think we're going to see is the Arab public, and I dare say the Western public as well, the young people are going to change the scene. They're going to have an impact on Democratic Party policies. I mean, imagine in a small town in California, I saw such a diverse group of people chanting from the river to the sea. I had goosebumps. I couldn't believe. I lived to the day when in the United States, a group of Americans, black, white, Jews, Muslims, Arabs, Christians, they were all chanting from the river to the sea in defiance of the Israeli lobby, which want to conflate that slogan with anti-Semitism. As if, I mean, the slogan is merely a nostalgic slogan and a political slogan that is intended to remind that the Palestinians were driven out, not from the West Bank and Gaza only, but also from the entire state of historic Palestine. And I think the Arab people in time will be able to press an agenda that is going to sway Arab policies. And we're going to see an impact of that, no doubt. And I've seen some positions of Arab government adjusting to the changing, angry mood of Arab public opinion. The Democratic Party, however, has been really deaf to the screams of the base of the Democratic Party, because Biden and Sanders and Blinken are all very much collaborating with AIPAC in order to prevent any impact from public opinion of the Democratic Party on the policies of the US government.
Real quick, before I go to the next topic I want to raise, which is to actually piggyback off of what you're saying, I want to remind everybody who's watching to please make sure you like this episode. It does help boost us in the algorithm, because Breakthrough News is an independent media outlet. They don't automatically shove us down your throat on YouTube like they do with CNN. So make sure you do hit the like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, be sure to subscribe to Breakthrough News. Going back to what you were talking about, specifically with respect to the US, the Democratic Party has been disgusting. The Biden administration has been disgusting to watch them justify slaughtering children and essentially, like you said, telling the Israelis there are no red lines. However, there have been some slight shifts that I just want to mention. Most recently, we've seen 40 members of Congress are now calling for a ceasefire. I don't believe Bernie Sanders is one of them, which
No, he's not.
He's not one of them. He's saying everything but that, which is
Exactly
really disgusting. But still, that's 16 more members calling for a ceasefire than we're calling for it. Since Reuters released a poll a few days ago showing 68% of Americans support a ceasefire. And that, by the way, includes 75% of Democrats and 50% of Republicans. That also comes alongside polls showing that Biden's approval rating has dipped even among his own party related to his foreign policy specifically. So I think that's interesting to see. That's also happening as we witness historic protests across the U.S., sustained protests, sustained disruptions and shutdowns across the country in various ways for Palestine. It's been quite inspiring. And, you even had Hassan Nasrallah in his last speech a few days ago specifically mention the importance of protests in the West, because, of course, he knows the only way to stop this war is for the U.S. to stop this war. So I think that's really important to point out. But, of course, you've had a backlash because all of the popular support is with Palestine, whether we're talking about, in the schools, on the ground, in various institutions, like at the grassroots level, at the rank and file level. And so the Israelis and their supporters have had to push back with the hardest attacks they can raise. And that is, of course, by accusing everyone of anti-Semitism, by trying to get the state to investigate and spy on people. So I'm curious. I mean, you are a professor. You work with students. One of the most vicious levels of attack I've seen has been on students on college campuses. Can you talk a bit about that? Just that really horrific backlash from basically the Zionist movement to try to suppress support for Palestine in the West.
Right. I mean, there is an incredible narrative. I want to make a couple of comments about what you said. The first one is just think about the poll you mentioned. More than 50% of Republicans are for a ceasefire. So more than half of Republicans in the United States are ahead of Bernie Sanders on the question of ceasefire. Bernie Sanders says empty rhetoric and words, fake tears, crocodile tears about Palestinians, but he refuses to speak for a ceasefire. And I also want to say about the diverse nature of people who support ceasefire. The first 18 members of the House who supported the ceasefire, every single one of them was a person of color, not a single white person among them. Thirdly, there was a very important, massive demonstration in Washington, D.C., hundreds of thousands. And I've heard from people who were involved in it how massive it was, how effective it was. And that got reverberation in the Arab world. They paid attention to that. They saw this is the largest demonstration in the history of the United States for Palestine that really stirred emotions throughout the world. They realized something is changing. As far as the role of public opinion here in the United States and the impact on college campuses, there's no question that the undemocratic nature of universities is being exposed. Universities are not democratic institutions. They are largely dictated by business corporations and large donors. And these donors are dictating not only the policies that are issued by presidents and provosts and so on, but they are deciding to instill a culture of intimidation and doxing on students who are brave enough, some of them Jewish, Muslim, and Arab, who are speaking on Palestine college campuses. And they want to brand them all as anti-Semite and as hateful people, which is not the case. I can tell you The ones who are afraid on college campuses are not the pro-Israelis. Why would they be afraid? The entire culture of the United States is hospitable to the most vicious, most violent brands of Zionism. The ones who are afraid are Muslim and Arab students, Palestinians in particular. I have been on my campus teaching for 30 years. And throughout my years, the only club I ever advised was the feminist club on campus. For the first time ever, Muslim students on my campus asked me to be the advisor of the Muslim club on campus because they were scared. They felt they needed my support because they are afraid of what's happening around them. That's the climate of fear on college campuses of the United States. And the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, they have front page articles in which a student at UCLA has a profile about her because she said one time she spoke about Israel and another student shamed her and told her you should be ashamed of yourself for supporting apartheid. And there's a long article about her. I mean, real intimidation are those pro-Palestinians whose names are now plastered on billboards, on trucks that are going around neighborhood to shame them. And you have wealthy business donors to universities mentioning their name, plastering their name, just like Canary Mission, and asking people not to hire them. We know people who have been fired from their jobs. We know students who will not be hired because of this. We know the brave Stephen Salaita, whose contract with the University of Illinois was canceled because of something he wrote on Twitter previously about an atrocity by Israel in Gaza, to show you that history did not start on October 7. History started since the advent of the Zionist invasion in Palestine, long before 1948 even. That's when the violence started being inflicted on a mass scale on the Palestinian people in 1930s and beyond. Stephen Salaita was terminated, his contract was terminated, and he was compelled to drive a school bus to make a living. This is the price that people who speak for Palestine pay. I do not envy a young Arab who is trying to get a job in America today in an academic setting. I am at an age where, I am a few years from retirement. But look at the young academics. What are they going to do? I mean, unless they are Arabs who speak in praise of Israel, they're not going to get jobs anywhere. I think they're going to be litmus tests. You heard the story about an Arab person coming into the United States, and he was asked at the airport about whether he participated in a demonstration for Palestine in France. There's an inquisition going on. Look at Germany. But as I said to you last time, let the world see the West as it is. Since Ukraine, and especially since Gaza, the West revealed the ugly face. It cares nothing about democracy, human rights, international law, nothing of that sort. These are all slogans that were intended in the Cold War to win over the hearts of people in developing countries. Now we see you as you are. You're as violent as colonial powers were, and you are trying to do what colonial powers did. But that's not going to work. The Palestinian people, after more than 100 years, refuse to be subjugated. I know you want them to find Israeli occupation to be pleasurable, but they don't, and they can't. And they continue to resist by Hamas and through others. Sometimes Palestinian organizations go under. New ones emerge. Hezbollah may go under in 10 years, 20 years. Another one will emerge. Just like when I was young, there were communist groups, Arab nationalist groups that were fighting Israel. More effective ones replaced them. And more effective one replaced another one, the one that's existing today. It is not going to settle until real peace occurs. And real peace is impossible without the establishment of justice. Justice, not for a Palestinian who's a collaborator in Ramallah. Justice for all Palestinians in refugee camps, in the West Bank, in Gaza, and yes, inside 1948 Palestine. Because those Palestinians do not live under equality, do not live under justice. And they also identify as Palestinians, no matter what Israel tries. And this is a state that not only declares itself a Jewish state in a country where there are non-Jews, Christians and Muslims, but it has declared officially in a semi-constitutional form that only the Jews on the land will have self-determination. That's the nature of the apartheid state. And that's why we insist on calling apartheid state. And no, it is not anti-Semitic. And it wasn't anti-Christian when we called South Africa apartheid state. And it is not anti-Muslim when we criticize Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Yeah, they're making such a mockery again of the issue of anti-Semitism. But, I want to touch on one issue, just a couple final points here I want to get your take on. And one is the issue of Syria. And the reason I raise that is because, you talked about international law and human rights and all these things that now we know are just completely fake if we didn't know before in terms of when the US talks about it. And, the biggest US talking point for years was that we have to overthrow the government in Syria because human rights and, Assad's evil and Syria's evil and they're just killing babies and, on and on and on, doing all the things that Israel's actually doing before our eyes in a way that, I don't think the U.S. can go to any country ever again and complain about human rights after what we've seen Israel do with U.S. bombs. But I also raise that to say that that was part of a project to take out one of many states the U.S. was trying to take out to make the region more hospitable to U.S. interests. And by proxy, that means Israeli interests, Saudi interests, the interests of the oligarchs in the region. And I feel as though, watching what's taking place now and seeing this, as it's called, the resistance axis, be able to work in this kind of united front sort of way to push back. Obviously, the country of Syria it's crucial to the resistance axis. We've heard them say that. We've heard Nasrallah say that. The U.S. wanted to overthrow Syria and implant in its place either a state living in chaos under various, Al-Qaeda type style rule, or a government that, is controlled by the U.S. the way that we see in states like, Jordan or Egypt or, one of the Gulf states. And that's all to say, I think this vindicates a lot of people seeing what's taking place now in the sense that, that's the real reason they attacked Syria, not because they care about human rights. Like if anybody still believes that, let your delusion go. They do not care about human rights, or we would not see a genocide in Gaza right now. And I just want to hear your thoughts on that, on the issue of, the war in Syria.
Look, there's no question in my mind, and I've said so many times, there are many terrible governments in the Middle East. All of them are terrible. Syria or other governments, Saudi Arabia and so on. If America ever wanted to change a government in the Middle East, it invariably wanted to replace it with the worst government. America's alternative for government in our region has always been the worst one. Look in the case of Libya. I mean, we were not fans of Gaddafi of Libya, but what is happening in Libya today, many Libyans believe that what was in place before was better than what they have now. The bloodletting hasn't ended. Libya is in a terrible shape, and it's on the blood of Libyan. It's on Ben Shapiro, Ben Rhodes. I'm sorry, the advisor to Obama. Yeah, I know. He's been in the news lately.
Mixing up our Bens.
I know. There's more than one Ben. Let me understand that. Which reminds me of there's more than one Hassan Nasrallah, because in 2006, the brilliant Israeli intelligence service sent an elite group into Baalbek. They had a deployment of helicopters and they kidnapped a Lebanese grocer. This is a true story. And they took him to Israel because they found out that he is a Hassan Nasrallah. Because the Arab expert in the Israeli military thought there is one Hassan Nasrallah in the world today. And they thought we got the leader of Hezbollah. Only after days and a lot of jokes and making fun of Israeli intelligence that he was returned back to Lebanon. So there's more than one Ben. So Ben Rhodes and Obama are responsible for the carnage in Libya. And they wanted to do something similar in Syria, and they did that. And this week, when all is happening in Gaza, the International Court of Justice rendered a judgment against Syrian war crimes. And it was brought in by 2 European countries. Who is going to believe this is really about human rights? Who is going to believe their intention is really to uphold human rights? We know their intention. Their intention are always sinister. They don't care about human rights. And certainly they don't care about Arab lives. They don't care about Arab lives to the point, Rania, that Ben Rhodes, advisor to Obama and the National Security Council, admitted in his book that the United States government wanted to support Al-Qaeda in Syria. Let the American people hear this. These are the terrorists who perpetrated September 11. The US government wanted to collaborate with them, and it did. And Israel actually provided them with aid and medical care. The terrorists of September 11, the real terrorists, those were part of the US plan for change in Syria. That's the kind of change US wants for Arabs. So whatever is bad, they want worse. You don't like Hamas? The United States has in place the corrupt, criminal, collaborationist team in Ramallah, headed by Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas, a Holocaust denier. That's US and Israeli choice as the leader of the Palestinian people.
It's really incredible. It's really, really incredible when you put it like that. And I wanted to touch on something else that I've seen you hit on as well on Twitter, and that is the issue of the two-state solution. I mean, God, this thing shouldn't have stayed alive as long as it did, because it was always a delusion. It was always fake. But what do you have to say about the two-state solution now, and why it's so important to make sure that we don't allow any of these countries still perpetuating this false notion that this will ever be a thing to continue to do so? Why is it important to push back against that?
In 1974, I was 14 years old, and that was the beginning of my political formation. When Yasser Arafat and his team started to propose the idea of having a mini-state in the West Bank and Gaza. And to me, that was an anathema. And it led me to identify with the so-called rejectionist scam, because I realized this is a plot against the Palestinian people. And this is a time, by the way, it is not, it is the time right now to reconsider the legacy of Yasser Arafat, because he is really responsible. This is a man who declared a Palestinian state when it still was under occupation. And today, Mahmoud Abbas was celebrating the declaration. What Palestinian state? There is no Palestinian state. It's under occupation. And some European country the other day, Prime Minister of Spain said, we're going to recognize the state of Palestine. You can't recognize it unless you help in ridding the Palestinians of the occupation by Israel. So the two-state solution was never a serious plan. It does not restore justice to all Palestinians. The only solution is a state that is not religious, neither Islamic, nor Jewish, nor Christian, in which everybody, regardless of faith, can live under full equality. And that is certainly the opposite of what we have in Israel today.
Exactly. And real quick, I do want to remind people again, make sure you please like the episode. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Asad, I think something I want to end on here is the idea that Israel can win. I mean, look, I obviously, I'm not suggesting that what's happening in Gaza is a win for anyone there. I don't think there's any winning in a situation like this where we're witnessing a genocide. However, Israel, has always been seen as this really strong military force, the strongest in the region, one of the strongest in the world, has the strongest intelligence agency. My electricity will come back in a moment. I live in Lebanon. We don't have electricity all day for lots of reasons, and you know why, Assad.
One of them is the United States. One of them is the United States. There was a plan by which the Syrians, the Jordanian, the Lebanese government were all cooperating to bring power to Lebanon. And the United States banned that because it said it violated Caesar's law of the United States of sanctions against Syria. It shows you, some people think we exaggerate. The United States is responsible for so much what's going wrong in our region, including the power shutdown right now in front of our eyes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my generator just kicked in because we have a system of generators to deal with the fact that the state can't provide electricity for more than about 5 or 6 hours a day because of what Assad just explained. But where I was going is that we thought Israel was this such a powerful force, one that could never be defeated. Its intelligence agencies know all. There's no getting past the Israelis. And then, of course, October 7th happened, which changed the entire calculation there. And, you have the famous Nasrallah quote from 2000 when Hezbollah liberated South Lebanon from Israeli occupation, saying that Israel is as weak as a spider web. And, to me, that's reminiscent of the famous Mao saying about how imperialism is a paper tiger. It's not as powerful and all-knowing as you think, basically. And so I guess saying all that, I'm curious, can Israel win?
Right. It can. It certainly can. And Israel has won before against children, Arab children. Israel is extremely skilled in murdering and slaughtering a large number of civilians. More than 60-70% of those who were killed in Gaza were children. And in that regard, all of those who are fans of this murder of children and civilians and women should applaud what Israel has done. And it's amazing, Rania, in this context, all the number of civilian women who were killed, how we haven't heard from Western feminists about what's happening in Gaza. But I'm not surprised at all, because racism is deeply seated in many of the left in Western countries. Some people tell me that Israel has changed. Now it seems very weak. And Israel seems like it lies a lot. Its propaganda is so cheap and badly made and so on. I tell them Israel has changed to the degree that Arab resistance groups have changed. This is not the theatric and the bombast of Yasser Arafat. These are resistance groups that are extremely effective, very skillful, and they are much better at propaganda than the enemy. Mm-hmm. Israeli propaganda today, I never thought I would live to this day. They remind me of Syrian propaganda of the 1960s. Look how much they lie. We can't catch up with their lies. They keep deleting videos, deleting tweets, deleting statements, and so on, because they realize they're being exposed to the world. Look at that horrible video they made of an Israeli actors pretending to be a Palestinian inside Gaza to speak against Hamas. They are desperate. But yes, militarily, they are in a terrible shape. They are scared because now it is the Arab volunteer fighter who is more powerful, more scary than the Israeli fighter. When I was young, it was the reverse. The Arab soldiers were scared of the Israeli soldiers. Now, 2006, do you know, Rania, to the last day, I wasn't sure if Lebanon was going to win because I lived through so many defeats. I wanted to believe in victory, but I was hesitant. But now, I have no doubt. The Zionist project is doomed. It's entirely based on mass violence. You cannot have real power. You cannot prevail if it's all based on mass violence. And for that reason, and because of the defiance of the subject population, the Zionist project is not going to prevail. And apartheid, just as it withered away in South Africa, it will go away with a bang in Palestine.
We certainly hope so. And I wonder how much racism actually contributes to their complete misunderstanding and miscalculation of the behavior of these groups in the region.
Totally, because I think they have such a low opinion of Arabs. They don't think of them as smart. They think of them as idiots. Look at the flyers they send over their heads. Look at the kind of propaganda because when they issue their propaganda, they think it's going to work with the Arabs because they think the Western media will always cover up for them. And it's true, they always cover up for them, no matter how much they lie. But the Arabs now are active on social media. The new generation of Arabs on social media are doing a great job in demolishing the underpinning of all Israeli propaganda. But you're right, it all goes down to their fundamental racism. They think so low of, just like those who own slaves. I mean, they thought so little of their slaves, they never anticipated they will revolt and they will earn their freedom. And that's what's happening before our eyes, no matter of this huge humanitarian cost of the Palestinian people. Their defiance has not weakened. That's what's significant.
And they even they have this like Israeli spokesperson who you're always mocking, and many people here are always mocking the Israeli
Don't say his
spokesperson.
name.
I won't.
Don't say his name.
But the Israeli spokesperson for the Arab world, nobody listens to anything he says. He literally, there was an entire TikTok trend of people hitting him with their shoe, which was really funny.
I love that.
But you know who they do listen to? Like you mentioned, the spokesperson for Hamas, Abu Ubaidah, or for Hamas's military wing, Abu Ubaidah, when he gives a speech, people listen. And also the women all think he's pretty hot. Even the secular ones are walking around talking about, is he married? Is he single? I'm available. This has been like a running joke, but people mean it. They're like, wow, this guy's speaking. It's eloquent. It sounds good. It's like resistance, all this stuff. This guy is so popular across the region right now in ways that Israel's spokesperson would never, ever, ever be. But regardless, they just don't understand the region. But then you have someone like Yahya Sinwar, who's the leader of like the Qassam brigades in Gaza, the Hamas military wing, who actually spent a significant amount of time in Israeli prisons and learned there how to speak Hebrew, and actually learned a lot about their culture. And that's what makes him really good at strategizing how to deal with the Israelis because he understands them. So I just some examples of what are reasons I think that the racism really obstructs their ability to understand how to fight their enemy.
But that's good. Let them be racist.
Yeah,
let them misunderstand us. I don't want them to know us. And let them sink in their ignorance. They have been ignorant for all these decades. I mean, I read the Israeli experts on the Arab world, and it's sometimes laughable about their assumptions and their preconceived notion. I mean, you listen to that Israeli military spokesperson in Arabic who shall remain unnamed. And he's a mockery of the entire Arab world. They have fun with them. And also now Israel has a new policy where they hire Arabs to produce in English and in French Israeli propaganda, and they think they're going to engage or influence Arab public opinion. And you go to these pages of these people, and the only ones engaged with them are Israelis. So it's definitely not going anywhere. But the racism persists. I mean, the Israeli project cannot continue without racism. I mean, otherwise, how are you going to justify the subjugation of the population? Similarly, holding slaves could not continue without racism because you have to justify it to yourself and to others. And there are no signs in Israeli society that there are people who are giving up on the racist premises of the Zionist project. You can't.
which is why the change has to come from outside. On that note, Assad, I want to thank you for taking the time to discuss all of this with me. Your voice is so important. Everybody, please do follow Assad on Twitter, as well as Assad. Can you tell people where they can read your work? Because you do write both in Arabic and in English.
I read also, but I write a daily column in Al Akhbar, which is a left-wing newspaper in Lebanon. And I also write a fortnightly article for Consortium News, which is a progressive American website.
Assad, thank you so much for joining me. For everybody who's watching, make sure you like the episode. And if you can, be sure to try to become a member of Breakthrough News. You can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a member, get access to exclusive content, as well as just help support independent media in a moment when the mainstream corporate media is lying a lot. So once again, thank you to our audience. And Assad, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Bye, Rania.